This is a little video that I should probably call dumb stuff that CB'ers do about an amp that came into repair. This is the Palomar 200X. According to the owner's manual, this is supposed to do about 200 watts on high and 50 watts on low with 3 watts of drive. And it has one little tube, driving tube, that originally it was 8950s. But the 8950s became very expensive, very rare, so someone replaced these with 6 LF6s, which are smaller, but they will work. They have the same pinout. Well, the guy brought it in. He said, oh, it was doing about 350 watts. You know, chances are he was probably using a Dozy or Paradynamics. Those meters seldom tell the truth. And they said, then it just suddenly worked. It suddenly quit working. Well, when I got in here, the first thing I found was instead of the 10 amp fuse that's supposed to be in there, he had a 20 amp fuse. And even it was bent. You know, it wasn't completely blown, but it was kind of bent inside. And to keep it from blowing, he had wrapped a piece of copper wire around the outside of the tube from one end to the other, so that even a 20 amp fuse couldn't blow. And then it just suddenly stopped working, according to him. Well, I took these tubes, these are the 6 LF tubes, and I put them in the tube tester. Normally when a tube is bad, I mean, you put a tube tester and a needle at least raise up to the bad mark, or maybe in between the bad and the good. Neither of these tubes would even bring the needle off of 0, even though they lit up and they don't look that bad. There's no indication of a gas leak or anything. The needle wouldn't even come off 0. No output at all. And generally bad tubes will at least do that. At least come up to the bad mark. Well, when I looked in the bottom of these tubes, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this or not, I'm going to hit the macro lens. There's a little wire on the input side of this tube that is melted in half. I'm going to rotate it. Maybe you can't make it out. Maybe you can. But the input wire to these tubes is melted in half because he was overdriving it with so much power. Like I said, it's supposed to have 3 watts drive. No telling what he was putting into this thing, but it was definitely a lot more than 3 watts to melt it. If you can see inside the tube, there's a little piece of metal that runs sideways, and then there's a melted little bulb at the end of it, and where it's supposed to go in the tube, inside the tube, there's no connection at all. It's just melted. And both these tubes are like that. Well, these tubes are about $65 a piece to go find new ones, which means it's going to cost $120 to $130 to repair this amp. And the driver tube still works, but it's pretty much flat. I mean, you got to key it down for 10 minutes before it even comes up to much of anything. So even the driver tube needs to be replaced. So his total repair cost just for tubes alone is probably going to be $140 something. And one of the plate chokes was burned as well, and I replaced that. But anyway, he brought this amp back to me in January, February this year. It's currently November. He hasn't come back to get it, and he never will, because it's not worth fixing. Even though, you know, the only thing that's really wrong with this, no tubes. So for all the CB'ers out there that think you can overdrive these amps and get away with it, you can't. You're going to screw up your tubes. They may eventually go flat, or in this case, you may melt the wire inside, at which point they completely stop working at all. And many of these tubes are very expensive now. And in this case, this amp's just not worth fixing. And it's not in that great shape to begin with. It does still work, other than the fact that it needs new tubes. So this is something I've seen over and over again. If you can find the owner's manual for these amps, get the owner's manual, see what it says to drive it with. Most of these amps from the 70s and the 60s and even the early 80s, they were meant to be driven with 4 watts. In this case, only 3. But most of them were meant for 4 watts. And that's all you should put in. And that doesn't mean 4 watts and swing 50. You know, people think they can, well, I'll just drop dead key low and swing 35 and they're going to get away with it. No, you're not going to get away with it, because if you're swinging 35, you're still putting 35 watts into it. These were designed for radios that actually had correct modulation, which is basically where you only double the carrier to reach 100% modulation. The whole CB belief about swing that far exceeds the carrier is complete nonsense, and the people that do that have no clue how AM works, because if they did, they wouldn't do that. They know that they were clipping the negative voice peak when they grossly exceed the carrier on the forward swing. But in any case, maybe this video will save a future CB'er a problem. Don't overdrive these things. You're not going to get away with it. Maybe for a week or 2 or 3 it'll put out, but you're going to toast the tubes. You're going to toast the plate choke and no telling what else on these amps. Look up to see what the tubes are supposed to put out. Look what the owner's manual says. And when your local nut job fruitcake dumbass tells you that the amp will put out 3 or 4 times more than it's supposed to, don't believe him. And you'll hear a lot of those guys. Don't believe them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're going to cost you money. You're going to blow your amp up. So there you go. A soon to be thrown in the trash can Palomar 200X, which is not worth fixing, quite frankly.